Principle number 5, follow through and overlap. This principle is about animating hair, cloth, arm swings, or anything that swings one way before swinging back into place. For example, if a batter swings for the ball, his bat doesn't stop moving once it hits the ball. It keeps moving all the way to the other side of the batter's body. Same with hair. If someone turns her head, her hair keeps moving after her head stops. Do you remember the overshoot and settle I emphasized in principle number 2 for anticipation? Well, that's what this is. These principles pair nicely with each other to create a complete and natural movement. My professor Mike Dietz in college used to call anything in this principle the dangly bits. Most animation pipelines have effects artists to simulate cloth and hair, but animators still have to know this because follow-through and overlap can apply to arms and tails of a character too. In this lesson, we're going to jump straight into Maya to see how wind creates overlap, and then we'll animate some tails. So here's a simple scene I set up with a sine curve and the ball rig with a tail attached to it. When something's flapping in the wind like this, it's almost like the wind is a sine curve pushing through that object. So all I did to make this animation was take all the controllers and hard key them every 2 to 3 frames. And I just matched the position of the sine curve. So I imagine that right here there's a big pocket of air, and right here there's another pocket of air. And as it pushes through the tail goes around the big pockets of air. Let me show you a better example with spheres. Each sphere represents a swirling pocket of air. When you slow this down, you can see that the tail goes in between every single ball. For me, sometimes it's easier to imagine wind visually like this. And in this example, the wind is very uniform, but if you want to create some really beautiful shapes in hair or tails or drapery, you can just imagine the wind as either smaller or bigger pockets of air, changing in size and speed and shape. That way you can get some really interesting movement in your overlaps. Alright, let's give this a try. Open up Lesson 5's Maya file. Now that we have the Maya file open, let's just make sure we're in side profile view. So if you're not, just go to Panels, Orthographic View, and hit on Side. And then let's make sure all of your objects are non-selectable except for your NURBS curves. And let's create a Shelf Tool button for this character rig. So click on your script editor, select all the curves, select the last line of code, middle mouse, click and drag and drop it into your custom shelf, hit Mel, right click, edit, go to Shelves, icon label, tail. Save. Okay, great. Now let's just go in here and start posing out this character's tail. Let's just set a keyframe every 2 frames or so. So let's just hit S with everything selected, and let's work on this tail. Once you're done working on the tail, change the time slider to 23 frames so it'll loop properly. And there you go. You have a tail flapping in the wind. So this is just a basic exercise you can do to warm up before you actually have to animate overlap. Or if you're stuck and you don't remember how things flap in the wind frame by frame, you can use this as a reference or a template and then smooth the animation from here. Eventually, if you practice enough and animate enough flags and tails and stuff like that, You'll have this down in your muscle memory and you'll understand what frames go next to each other. So now let's start from scratch. Let's open up a new Maya and animate a ball bouncing up and down in place with a tail following behind it. Okay, for this ball bounce animation, let's create a new Maya scene and then bring in our rig. File, create reference with options. Let's name it ball underscore tail A. Okay, now he's in the scene. You can fix his shader, two-sided lighting. Let's create a ground plane. And let's make sure we have a shelf button. Okay, so make sure you can only select your NURBS curves. Select all the controllers. Middle mouse click and drag and drop onto the shelf. And click edit. And let's name it ball tail. Save. Alright, I'm going to hide my grid, turn on the ambient occlusion. And let's make this animation 24 frames long. Okay, let's start animating a bouncing ball. So take this controller, start at 1, and let's have him go to frame 12 and jump this high. And then on frame 24, let's start back where we started. Okay, let's change the graph editor curves and make these last two broken tangents and linear. Let's edit this so it's a nice curve and let's play it. Let's add a little bit of rotation on this guy. So at the beginning he can be aiming up and on the end he can aim down. Let's make these linear. We don't really need this key in the middle here. We can change our time slider to go to frame 23. Alright, let's add a little bit of squash and stretch onto this guy. Select your squash controller, and when he's down on the ground, we can squash him down. And then by frame 5, let's put him back to normal. And maybe for one frame, he stretches. Alright. That looks like a little too much squash and stretch. So let's take this down. I'm going to select both keys, scale them, and shift middle click and drag in between them. That feels better. Alright, let's go ahead and animate this tail. So what I like to do to block out tail animation is set 2 keys and then start breaking it from there. So let's select all those controllers, hit S, and let's bring it up on this frame, because right before that he's coming down. So he's like this, and then right after that we can have it come down like this. And then let's take the time slider and move it back to frame 24. And we can take the first pose and put it on frame 24. And then let's watch that loop. That doesn't feel too bad. I wonder if we can make it more extreme. So let's deselect these controllers and maybe only select this controller and rotate that up. And then let's select all these controllers again and copy that over to frame 24. And then the frame right after that, let's move this more down. Okay. So that's a decent start. Let me show you what I do to quickly offset each segment of the tail. So we're going to select all the controllers of the tail. We're going to click on these icons in the graph editor. This one loops it onto the right side of infinity, and this loops it onto the left side. So it should be a perfect loop forever. So what I want to do is offset each segment of the tail by 2 frames. So let's deselect this first one, and then now we have just these last segments selected. Let's take the keys in the graph editor and offset them by 2 frames. And then let's deselect this one and offset it another 2 frames. And then same thing with this one. We deselect it. To deselect a controller within a selection, hold Control and left click on it. So we only have this guy left. And let's move that 2 frames forward. Now let's hit play and see if that looks any more natural. Great. So now you can kind of see the sine curve in the tail. This is feeling a lot more natural, and each segment of the tail is animating on its own timing. So one thing to keep in mind with overlap animation is the base of an object that's overlapping will usually move a lot less than the very end. The end has a lot more swinging weight to it, and it'll flail around a lot more. So we can go ahead and polish up the end a little more and make it move in a more beautiful way. So I like that it swings down here and it's still angled. The tip of it's still angled that way while the rest of it's swinging this way. So let's keep breaking that a little longer. So let's select this second to last controller and have it continue this way. That feels a lot better. And still, it can be broken this way. And same with this one, we can break it more that way too. There we go. Now let's polish up a little bit more of the beginning. So right when the ball starts to bounce up, we should have the tail fall pretty dramatically. So what we might want to do is take the base and move it farther down this way. And then we can also have this one fall quickly too. But you got to make sure that you're not messing up your cycle. So what you can do is select your keys and insert key. We're not using anything past 24 or before 1 anymore, so that was just used to offset all the controllers. Now we can go ahead and polish up the animation. So now you have this keyed, so that won't be messed up, and we can push this one farther down now. Same thing with the last 2 controllers. We're going to want to select the keyframes and insert key on the first frame. And it looks like it might need to be linear again. And the tip looks like it should start curving that way on this frame. It should be more angled like this. Let's make sure the time slider is just to frame 23. And we can go in here and make it more curved at the tip. Okay. Let's play that. That's looking pretty. And there's a little bit we got to do on the very, very tip. So let's do the same thing we've done before with the very last controller. Select your keyframes, insert key. Let's make this one linear. And on this part of the animation, it can start rotating like that. Should really be curved. The very end of the tail just whips around and has barely any time transitioning between which direction it moves. I think also the last thing we can do to make this animation look nice is fix this section. The last segment of the tail should probably swing a little earlier, like this. There we go. Okay. So this is a good start. I really like the way that the tip of the tail is making a nice figure 8 motion, and all the segments are broken up nicely to make it look natural. So we're going to animate one more thing in this lesson. We're going to use the same rig, but we're going to pretend the ball is someone's head and the tail is someone's ponytail. Their head's going to turn and the ponytail is going to swing until it settles. So you can save this file, play blast it, and then open up a brand new Maya file. So let's bring in the rig. File, create reference. Let's have it ball, tail, A. Okay, we can turn on two-sided lighting to fix the tail, and let's turn on ambient occlusion. Okay, I guess we don't really need a ground plane for this animation, but let's bring this guy up on its world controller, and we can probably use the same shelf tool we made last animation. Oh, never mind. We gotta make a new one. So let's make sure we can only select controllers. Let's open our script editor and select all the controllers. Middle mouse drag and drop onto the shelf. Click on Mel and let's name it ball tail. Okay. So like I said before, let's pretend this is a head and this is going to be our ponytail. So we can just bring that down. Gravity will be pulling a ponytail down like that. And let's have our animation be about 50 frames. And let's set a key on everything at frame 1. Alright, so this will be our head controller. So let's have the person turn their head to the left on frame 30. Let's have them turn about 90 degrees maybe. Yeah, that should be good. And let's have the person anticipate the turn of the head a little bit on frame 18. So let's copy frame 1 and move it to frame 8. And then now let's turn it back a little bit. Now there's a little bit of anticipation. And then we want some overshoot too. So let's take frame 30 and maybe let's have a long overshoot around frame 18 and move that a little bit further. Okay, cool. Let's clean this up a little bit in the graph editor. So let's smooth this out. Let's try to make that more like a smooth curve and that one too, and then smooth this one out a little bit as well. Okay. And then maybe we can also add a little bit of a tilt to the head. So right here we can have the person tilt that way a little bit more. Okay, that looks fine for now. Let's move on to the actual ponytail. So right now it's hanging perfectly down towards the ground, and then when the head anticipates back, we can have the bottom drag a little bit behind, like this. We can maybe have that keyframe happen on frame 7. Okay. And then when the head rotates the most, the ponytail is going to be bent the most. So just before the character's head starts to slow down, maybe like 3 frames before the character's all the way at its extreme, on frame 15, we can have the ponytail bend all the way in the opposite direction. So it's hanging behind in the direction that it came from. And then when it settles, let's just put a key at the end when the character is not moving at all, we can have it settle back into place. So go to frame 1 with all the ponytail controllers selected, middle click and drag and drop on frame 30 and hit S. Okay. And sometimes the controllers go over to the side, so you can just move it and then hit undo and it'll be fixed. So this is what we have so far. Now we need to start breaking it down a little bit. Once the character is in its overshoot, so it overshoots on frame 18, the head slows way down and settles into place. So when it slows down, the ponytail actually will keep moving to the right. So let's select just these controllers on the ponytail, and around right when it's slowing down, we can have it continue moving that way. That looks a little much. So let's take these and lower them. And let's push the timing a little bit more on that. Okay, cool. I don't like the way that it settles at the end, so let's have it swing back a little bit more to the left one more time before it falls straight down. So let's take these controllers and the keyframe that it's on at the end and push it farther out. So then on frame 30, we can curve it a little bit this way. Actually, why don't we settle this one completely down? And these last two segments can just move a little bit more at the end. Let's also make sure this last controller, yeah, that one's good too. Okay. Looks like we need a little bit more time with that. So let's push the timing more. Just on the last two segments. There we go. So then it settles nicely into place. Maybe push the last one another frame. Nice. And then in the middle here, when it moves the most, we can really play with that pose more. So as it turns, it curves left. And when it's falling down, this last section can angle more to the left. Just to exaggerate it a little bit more. And on this section, the end can hang back again. I can swing a little bit more before it settles. I want to add another little bit of movement just at the tip, at the very end. It can overshoot a little bit more. Right, like that. Yeah. And then zero out. Let's watch that. Cool. This is looking pretty good, but I think the midsection is still a little stiff. So I think on this controller that controls the middle of the ponytail, we can have it bend more on frame 15. And then when it swings back to the right, it can be a little more bent. Okay, let's watch that. We're missing a little bit of movement. If you play back and watch, you can see the just the bottom half is moving the most. It looks like there's a little bit of swinging that needs to be happening on the second controller from the base. So maybe we bring this one up a little bit. And this one down a little bit. There we go. It's kind of difficult to tell that this character is ahead. I'm gonna tilt the whole thing up on rotate X. So maybe the person's looking up, and then I'm gonna take the base of the ponytail on rotate X, and whoops, that's way too much, and then rotate it straight down again. There. Now you can feel a little bit more of the rotation of the ball. And then to finish it off, let's offset the timing of each segment, just by a frame. So we didn't have much animation on the base. It was connected to the head directly, so we didn't need to move it too much. The middle part moves the least amount. So we're really going to just be offsetting these two last parts. Select both of them. Go in your graph editor and offset them forward by 1 frame. That way, the swinging will happen just a frame after the swinging of the second controller from the base. Now control and deselect the second to last controller, and then on the last controller, move it 1 more frame. That way, we're certain that all the animation is on different timing. That helps just break up the movement and keeping it looking natural. Okay, cool. So that's how you animate a ponytail. In this lesson, you may have noticed that we also animated a little bit of straight ahead method. We didn't just purely do pose to pose. We did pose to pose a little bit when the character's head was turning, but on the tail, I kind of animated it more straight ahead because I didn't want the movement to stop at any one place. I wanted it to settle back and forth until it was fully slowed down. So I hope you guys enjoyed this lesson. I have a really good time animating things like this. If you had any problems with this, please feel free to go watch the videos again and try animating them. It doesn't take very long to animate tails and hair like this. It just takes practice to make it look good. Thank you for watching. I'm going to move on to lesson 6.